Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online viewers. Start a viewing party. And remember, post a comment or question. Your voice matters and I want to hear from you. History was made last year when Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden selected my friend and California's junior senator Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential running mate. Women and men all over this country celebrated this historic selection, the first African American and Asian American to be selected for a spot on the national political ticket. That is the first African American woman and Asian American woman. However, since the announcement, Senator Harris has faced a barrage of sexist and racist attacks from not just self-identified white supremacists, right-wing pundits, Twitter trolls, but she has been attacked from the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. He has called her mean, nasty, unqualified, and he's even revived the heinous racist birther attack he used against President Obama to challenge her U.S. citizenship and constitutional right to run for vice president. But see, attacking females running for office and office holders isn't new, and it's not exclusive to Donald Trump. Women, and particularly African American women, have had to overcome incredible odds and vicious attacks to become the political powerhouses that we see serving in all branches of government. These women are going to have an oversized role in November's presidential election. But how will they navigate the landmines and vicious attacks to assert their influence in the November elections? Let's discuss. My first guest is California Congresswoman Karen Bass. She is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and was one of 4 African American female leaders on Joe Biden's short list for vice president. She has been breaking barriers since she began her journey in politics. In 2008, she was elected to serve as the 67th Speaker of the California State Assembly, becoming the first African American woman in the United States to serve as a Speaker of a state legislative body. Welcome, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Welcome, Congresswoman Bass. I'm so excited to sit down with you. So much is happening in the country, and your voice is so critical at this time. First, I want to congratulate you. So many accomplishments this year, from leading the charge on the George Floyd police reform bill to being on that short list for VP. And I don't think people recognize how important it is that you, as a congresswoman, was on that list. Joe Biden told us 4 African American women were at the top of that list. And typically, when we think of people on the VP list, they're senators, maybe governors, but not typically people, like yourself, who sit in our U.S. Congress. So tell us, what was it like to be a part of that exclusive club?
Well, first of all, it is great to be on, Ariva. Great to be with you. And I so admire all of the work that you do in the media, but also in the community, taking care of our kids. So thanks a lot for having me on. And let me just tell you, what a whirlwind, what a year. This is a year that we will never forget for so many reasons in our life. But I will tell you, it was a tremendous honor to have been considered and to have been with the other women, especially the African-American women, who absolutely every single one was outstanding. And so I'm just very proud of the vice president, soon to be president, and very excited about our ticket. I think Biden-Harris has been electric from the minute it was announced. And I know that this week, it's just so sad though. I mean, it's just gonna be such an unjust adjustment for all of us to make, having a convention virtually, but just like their rollout, I'm sure the convention speeches, the headlines for the evening will be very, very exciting.
Well, you tweeted this really beautiful picture of you and our California Senator Harris, hopefully soon to be VP Harris. And I was just touched looking at it because I know in this whole lead up to who Joe Biden would pick, there was a lot of, gut punches. There was a lot of Oppo research that was dropped. But what I love about you, and I've always loved about you, and I've, watched your career here in California just, explode, is that you are always you're a peacemaker, you're a team player, obviously an incredible leader. So I don't want to take anything away from your leadership skills, but at a time when this country needs to be united, I just love that you are standing out as a voice to unite not just African American women around this ticket, but people from all walks of life. And I think that's so important right now. And thank you. I guess just thank you for doing that, because it's so important. But I wanted to talk with you about the attacks. We saw so many vicious attacks, not just on Senator Harris, but also on you. Harris was called too ambitious, but then there was this attack against you that really bothered me, and it was this attack that you were somehow too compliant. That you were too likable. And we know in this era of female leadership, that's so crazy. So, I mean, when you heard that, what did you think, knowing all that you've accomplished?
Well, actually, that's a new one to me. I hadn't heard the too likable. But, I mean, politics is a rough sport. I think any of us that are involved in this know that and know what is going to come our way. And so I think that we're all prepared for that, but you can't really get involved politically and be thin-skinned. I think it's very important you understand where the attacks are coming from, you understand why they're being lodged, you hold your head up and you move forward. But Ariva, one of the things that you might have been making reference to is the attempts to get us as Black women to conflict with each other. And that was just 100% unacceptable. We talk to each other, we know each other, and we were not going to allow that to happen. And so I think that might have been to the disappointment of some, but now what is important is that we rally behind Biden and Harris, and we especially look out for Harris because the attacks were coming within minutes. And I think it's very important that we respond every time we see those attacks. We respond through social media or through some kind of way, because lesson learned from 2016 is that sometimes those attacks were ignored and didn't really realize how they would take a life of its own. So I think it's important that all of us embrace our ticket as a whole, but we have to have an extra line of defense around Kamala Harris as vice president nominee and soon to be vice president in the next, maybe 3 or 4 months. Can't wait. I mean, 80 plus days to the election, and then we'll have a couple of months after that. But we're going to have to surround her, and not just through the election, we're going to have to surround her while she's in that office too. I mean, we have had 3.5 years of a racist in chief who has done everything he can to tear this country apart. And it's going to take a lot to bring it back together. And so we're going to have to be protective of both Biden and Harris, but with special emphasis on Kamala Harris, because we know what's coming her way race-wise, we know what's coming her way gender-wise.
Yeah, and Congresswoman Bass, we've already seen it, right? As you said, just minutes after the announcement, we've seen the attacks coming from, right-leaning publications and blogs and pundits, and even from Donald Trump himself, calling her nasty, calling her mean. Now the whole birther, right out of his playbook with President Obama, now challenging her constitutional right to even run for VP, suggesting that somehow she's not a U.S. citizen. And I was really taken aback. I was not surprised by Donald Trump, because as you just said, he is the racist in chief, right. And we've seen these attacks before. But Jared Kushner, who tries to portray this more sensible advisor role to Trump, would not acknowledge nor apologize when asked by a CNN anchor about that birther attack on Kamala Harris. So I think you're right. We're going to have to be so protective of her, not just during this election, but also once she's in office. I want to ask you, though, about, go ahead.
Ariva, before you move on, But there's the attacks that are going to come from the right. But I am equally concerned about attacks coming from, and I'm not going to say they're coming from our community because I don't know where they're coming from, but attacks against her that raise questions about whether or not Black people, and especially young Black people, should be excited by her. That we're going to have a whole separate strategy for that. We expect the racist attacks, but one thing that we weren't aware of in 2016 that we know now is the Russian influence, the foreign influence that was targeting African Americans and young African Americans to dissuade them from participating in the election. And I know that that's going to happen again. That's going to be directed at Biden because of the crime bill. That's going to be directed at Harris because of her work as a prosecutor. And I think that we need to be prepared for that as well. The racist stuff, we know what to do with. But the other stuff, I think, requires a different strategy. And we're going to have to be very aggressive and proactive in that regard.
You're absolutely right, Congresswoman Bass. I had a young activist on my show last week, and she's been organizing on college campuses. She was in Michigan, and she's actually a Howard University student. So although she was super excited about Kamala Harris because she's a bison, like Senator Harris is, she said that while organizing on these college campuses, she wasn't hearing from the students the level of enthusiasm, the level of support, and in fact said that about 50% of the students that she was talking to, rejected Harris as a candidate. And right. So you're absolutely right. There is still this misinformation campaign that was waged against her when she ran for president that distorted her prosecutorial record and that, distorted her record when she was serving in California as the Attorney General. And we've got a lot of work to do to correct that misinformation that's out there and to get people to focus on the here and now, which is getting the most dangerous president ever in our history out of the White House, and the need to come together around that. And I am a little encouraged though, because I'm seeing some young activists who were big Bernie Sanders supporters who are coming forward. There was an op-ed piece in the LA Times by Erica Smith. She's a millennial voter who said she wasn't in favor of Harris until she considered the alternative to Harris, which is Donald Trump.
Right.
So I think we're making some progress, but you're right, there's a lot of work to be done. And I want to just ask you about this double standard. We see it so often in elections, where women are attacked if they're too ambitious. They're attacked if they're not ambitious enough. And we don't see those same kinds of attacks being, launched against male candidates. How have you fought against that, given the tremendous roles that you played once, even in electoral politics? I want to note that you were the first African-American woman ever in this country to lead a legislative state house. And that had to come with tremendous responsibilities as well as, I'm sure, attacks.
Well, for me, I have always, no matter what I have done, I've always just kept my eyes on the prize. And the prize is, what can I do on behalf of my community? So whether it's improving the foster care system, dealing with criminal justice, looking at improving US relations in Africa, all of the issues I've worked on, I stay focused on the issues, and I don't worry about the attacks, the criticism that comes with the job. You just can't. You can't allow that. Those are distractions. Those try to take you off track. But if you're very clear about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who you are, then I think you can power through it.
So talking about powering through, I want to talk about your friend, your leader, Nancy Pelosi. She said she's going to call you guys back from your recess to address this looming issue with our United States Postal Service. I just want to get your take on that. I don't know if we can emphasize how big of a problem what's happening with the Postal Service is and what it may mean in terms of voter suppression in this upcoming election. Can you give us some context of what the magnitude of this issue is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to look at it. This is the act, or the attempted act, of a very desperate man who knows he is losing, who has no clue how to deal with the pandemic or the economy. And so he is going to resort to desperate tactics to win re-election. This is the kind of thing you see in other countries, that the United States always holds our head high like we're so above the corruption and the election stealing that happens around the world. Well, this is exactly what we're witnessing right here at home, where he is going to cut back resources on the post office so the mail can't be delivered, so your votes won't be counted. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to tell everybody, you have to vote very, very early. I mean, some of the ballots for the November election come out as early as the end of September. And we need to vote the second we get that ballot, because if it takes 5-10 days to get back because they've cut back on the technology and the staffing, then we need to make sure that we out-organize their suppression. But it's not just about voting. It's about medications. Thousands of people get their medications through the mail. It's about employing veterans. The post office is the #1 employer for veterans in the United States. And then African Americans. We don't need to talk about our history with the post office. I'm sitting here talking to you today because my father was a postal worker for 37 years. And so I think that the Postal Service has been vital, but there have been efforts to sabotage and privatize the post office for many years. And I think this is the act of a desperate man attempting to move the privatization agenda along and win re-election, or rather, I should say, steal re-election.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that Speaker Pelosi, had the foresight to bring Congress back into session to address this issue. Because when you look at what's going on social media, you're seeing those veterans that you talked about. You're seeing elderly people. You're seeing people with illnesses, post about how they're not getting their medication, how they're not getting,
Right.
vital mail that's critical to their lives. I want to ask you, Congresswoman Bass, when you all are back in this emergency session, any chances of making any progress on the HEROES Act? Millions of Americans are waiting for
Right.
additional stimulus dollars, additional unemployment benefits. And so far, it looks like those negotiations have stalled. So any hope that if
Well, there is always hope, but I will tell you, just because I think it's important to remember, the House passed the HEROES Act almost 3 months ago. So it has been sitting languishing in the Senate for almost 3 solid months. And essentially what the Senate didn't even want to discuss it until unemployment benefits were on the verge of running out. And now they have run out. And the idea that they are quibbling over the $600 a week payment to people, while at the same time, Steve Mnuchin is in charge of $500 billion to be doled out to major corporations. Now, granted, I don't want to see the airlines fold or the hotels fold, but he didn't even want to tell people where the money was going. And it's a question of the accountability. So you're talking $500 billion, $600 a week. The notion that $600 a week is so much money and that will prohibit people, or rather dissuade people from going back to work.
It's really galling. And I know so many people, I've talked to so many people on my show who literally said they can't pay their bills. They're facing eviction because of the cutoff in those benefits. So we remain hopeful. I just want to ask you about Michelle Obama. She's going to headline the convention tonight. We know, one of the most popular first ladies ever, and remains, one of the most popular figures in the Democratic Party. What do you think it's going to mean having Michelle Obama on Monday night and Kamala Harris on Wednesday night at the convention? Although, we won't be packed into that stadium like we were in 2016, but still, such a significant time in our history to have two powerful African-American women on the stage.
Oh, I think it is just going to be so exciting, historic. Oh my goodness. I mean, I can't wait. Even though we're doing it virtually and I'll be sitting in my living room instead of in that big stadium, feeling all of the electricity around it, it'll still be very, very exciting. And knowing that she's going to be on the trail is just, just amazing.
Well, before I let you go, Congresswoman Bass, I have to ask you, so many big things happening for you this year. Will you be ending this year, perhaps, considering a position as Secretary Bass, or maybe even California Senator Bass? Any thoughts about the next job for Congresswoman Bass?
Ariva, I'm going to keep doing my work, plowing ahead, and we will see what happens.
Well, I can see you in either of those positions, leading this country as you have done so incredibly well for over 2 decades now. And again, thank you so much for sitting down with me, and thank you for your leadership on these important issues at a time like this. Female leaders like you are play an oversized role in what's happening in this country. And I'm so proud to say you're a Californian.
Oh,
So proud to say you are my Congresswoman, and most importantly, you're my friend. So thank you.
absolutely. That's the most important one.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Here, congratulations to you.
All right, take care. Have a great day and enjoy the convention tonight. We'll all be at home with popcorn, eating, watching it, but it's going to be a lot of fun. There is my big interview today with Congresswoman Karen Bass. Can't thank her enough for all that she has done to pave the way and lead the way around women in government. Super excited about my next guest as well. She is Democrat Katie Hill. She made history when she was elected to Congress in 2016 by flipping a Republican district blue. But Ms. Hill resigned from her position in less than 2 weeks after nude photos of her were exposed on her internet and less than a year into her term. Ms. Hill says she resigned in part due to a double standard for women in office. She has a new book out, She Will Rise, and is the host of the podcast Naked Politics. Good morning, Katie.
Hello, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. I just look back to that period when you were running for office and you were part of this emerging class of female leaders who were, doing big things in Congress and who were flipping seats all over this country. So I ask you now, as you look back on those days and you see what's happening now with Kamala Harris, the attacks that she's come under, does that make you feel like we're going backwards in some ways?
Well, I would say, the mere fact that she's appointed, right, as the VP select, I think it shows that we are moving forward. But things like my resignation and the attacks that she's continuing to face are evidence that we still do face that double standard, and that we're going to for a long time to come. It's going to take really concentrated work on all of our parts, calling out this kind of sexism when we see it, standing up against it, really reflecting on our own internalized misogyny. And really trying to break down and dismantle the barriers that we all face to solve these problems for the long term and gain true equality. And that's what I wrote about in my book. So I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited that we have so many women leading the way with the convention, including Karen Bass and Michelle Obama. Karen just reminded me while you were on there just how amazing she is. But it's an exciting time, but we cannot take any of the gains that we've made for granted, and we're going to have bumps along the way. And I think the more that we as women kind of gather around each other and support each other, the better off we're going to be.
What do you say, Katie, to those voters when they hear these attacks, particularly on Senator Harris as being too ambitious? And like I said, with respect to Congresswoman Bass, she was attacked for being too compliant, being too likable. Those messages start to seep into the psyche of some people and start to really question whether, they're competent, sufficiently competent to run for office. And we know that when we look at Donald Trump, someone who had never been in public office, who had this long history, in many ways, very negative history, particularly around his treatment of African Americans, his treatment of women, the misogynistic statements that he made and continue to make, that the voters are willing to give him a pass on all of that history, but yet, they somehow get fixated on, whether Senator Harris wants to be the president, as if somehow you shouldn't be ambitious if you are already a U.S. Senator and you're on the short list to be VP.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this is exactly what we're seeing, that when I'm talking about the internalized misogyny, the centuries of where we haven't seen women in power. So, whether it's finding criticism for them being too ambitious or for the opposite, we have seen men hold the seats of power for so long. And, even though in Congress, for example, we had this Year of the Woman in 2018, we had so many women elected, we still make up about a quarter of Congress, which means that we have half of the representation that we should, according to the percentage of the population that we make up. And that means that we have a really long way to go. And so for us to truly to truly break this down, it means that we have to elect more women. Just up and down the ballot, we have to elect more women. We have to get people used to the idea that women in power should not be different than men in power, except for that we're better at it. You know what I mean?
Well, I would agree with you wholeheartedly on the better part. Katie, you resigned even though Nancy Pelosi and other powerful women in Congress asked you not to and urged you, to stick it out. I just want to talk to you a little about how men who are embroiled in scandal in public office, again, are treated differently than women. So you had these naked pictures that were released, about you that happened before you were actually even elected into Congress. So from an ethical, congressional standpoint, you weren't forced to resign because those pictures predated your being elected into office, but you chose to. But what about these men? We see so many men who've been involved in, again, we can go back to Donald Trump, we can count the scandals that he's been involved with porn stars and paying off porn stars and hush money payments. We can count, the endless scandals, but yet there again seems to be this acceptance and willingness to give him the benefit of the doubt that's different than when female elected officials are involved in what may be considered a scandal.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think made it feel like I needed to resign was that these images were being circulated in a really disgusting way. And there seemed to be no end to how the media were willing to exploit those images. And, I'm talking particularly about the right-wing media. And the Republican operatives in my district that had gotten a hold of those because my ex-husband had leaked them were, they were willing to do whatever it took to just bombard me and bombard, my staff and my family and our constituents. And really, I was afraid of my colleagues and the consequences it was going to have. And so it didn't feel like there was any way to make it stop unless I stepped back. But, as I laid out in my speech, I was stepping back, but it didn't mean that I was going away. It meant that I needed to figure out a new role. And I think, a big part of that role is now helping other women get elected. I talk about the role that we're working on in my PAC called Her Time, which is a political action committee that's entirely dedicated to getting young women and women of color elected. We're focusing on advocating for the issues that matter the most, the ones that I lay out in my book to break down these systems of misogyny and sexism. And then we're really working on mobilizing young women as a voting bloc, 18 to 40-year-old women who don't normally, or we can't normally count on showing up in every election, but we want to figure out what it's going to take to do so that it's not just presidential elections, but it's every single election so that we can mobilize that voting bloc to elect more women across the board.
Katie, what advice would you give to a young woman who's either starting in her journey, running for office, or maybe someone like Cori Bush, who just got elected in Missouri by, winning that seat that had been held by Lacy Clay for decades? Someone who's just starting out, how would you advise them to inoculate themselves from the attacks? Because I have to imagine, at some point they feel personal. We heard Karen Bass say she just kind of keeps her head down and motors through the work, but when they get to be, loud and they get to be, really all over, you can't pick up the paper or go on your social media account without seeing those kind of vicious attacks. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to, be in office, but they want to inoculate themselves from the attacks?
I don't know that there is any way to inoculate yourself. I think that what the advice that I've begun to start giving women is that what happened to me is pretty much the worst that can happen. So put yourself in that situation and figure out how you would have moved through that. And I think that, I hope that a lot of people have learned from my situation and especially seeing that they would not have resigned, right? That they would have continued to plow forward. And I think that makes a big difference to say, okay, we know we can get hurt by rising in power, by, putting ourselves out there like that. We know that we can get hurt. But what's happening is that women are getting hurt every single day. If we aren't doing something, if we aren't standing up like this, then it's not just us. 1 in 4 women are going to be sexually assaulted during their lifetimes. The pay gap is a very real thing, and it's ongoing. And we have this rampant problem of domestic abuse and coercive control, and none of those things are going to be addressed until we have women leaders that are charging forward and fighting these issues on behalf of all of us. So what I say is basically you got to get a really thick skin and be ready for it and know that it's going to be coming. But the more that you move forward, all of us collectively are going to be able to benefit from it. And eventually, I think those standards will change.
And Katie, what do you think about? I was looking at some statistics around the women that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. He likes to say he got 52% of, the female vote. And some pundits say it was closer to around 41%. But whether it's 40 or 50%, it's still a large number of women that voted for Donald Trump. Again, given his, horrific record on women. Why do you think we're still seeing women, again, willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and not have that same attitude when it comes to female leaders?
Well, if you break it down by age and by ethnicity, then we see that that group of women that did vote for him are overwhelmingly older and white. And I think that that's something to say about this internalized sexism that we've gotten, that has been, that has really permeated the culture that we're beginning to change. That's why I talk about the 18 to 40-year-old block, because what we see is a drastic voting difference between women under 40, and it's really women over 55 or so that are voting very differently. But I think it is the fact that men and women over a certain age have had a hard time acknowledging women in power, especially if you're conservative leaning, especially if you believe in a certain set of ideals that are, frankly, contrary to the ones that I think are empowering to women. And I think so many of us do. So I think it's changing. But we have so many examples of, in my opinion, women who vote against their own interests, just like we see in other cases. But I think that we're going to see a big change, I hope, in this election from before. And what we need to know is that some people are they are what they are, but we have the opportunity to change and mobilize the next generation and people who are younger. And the more we show up, the more that we are consistent in our voting habits, the more of a difference it's going to make.
Well, congratulations again on your new book. Congratulations on your podcast. And one last question. Any chances that Katie Hill, the Congresswoman, will run again for public office?
It's not in the immediate future. I'm excited about my role, helping other women, but I'll never say never, just because I'm going to turn 33 next week. So I figure I've got plenty of time still if I change my mind.
Well, happy early birthday to you. And again, thank you for, your voice on this issue. Good luck with the book and the podcast. And I'm sure we'll continue to see you around, playing a pretty critical role in Democratic politics, and particularly inspiring the next generation of women who are looking to lead. So again, thanks, Katie, for sitting down.
Thanks so much. Good to see you.
All right, that's Katie Hill. She says she's only 33, and she's right. She's got lots of time to run for office or to do whatever she desires to do. I just appreciate her courage to come out and talk about what had to be a really dark and ugly period in her life, but yet she's turning that pain into passion and plowing through and making a difference. So again, congratulations to Katie Hill. My next two guests are Christina Reynolds. She's Vice President of Communications for Emily's List, a 35-year-old political action committee that has spent over $250 million to elect Democratic women to elected office. And joining me also is Wendy Gruhl, who was one of those women that Emily's List supported in her run for mayor of the city of Los Angeles in 2013. She's also on the board of Emily's List. Wendy was the second woman in LA's history to win citywide when she was elected to city controller in 2009. She also served on the LA City Council, and I'm proud to say that I was part of her run for mayor for the city of Los Angeles. So good to have you both, Wendy and Christina. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here.
Hello, ladies. We are talking about sexism and politics, and both of you know a whole lot about both of those topics. I'll start with you, Christina. Emily's List has been on the forefront of spending lots of money helping female candidates get elected in offices up and down the ballot. So what do you think about the great news that Kamala Harris is Joe Biden's pick for VP? What does that mean for the work that you're doing at Emily's List?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for discussing this topic, because I think it's important that we all understand the underlying sexism and racism. Sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's a little sneakier. And so we need to be aware of it so we can call it out. We are thrilled about future Vice President Harris and about what she brings to this ticket, about the excitement that she creates all around the country and in so many different communities. So we're really excited. We're also over here watching and saying we're going to have her back when with a lot of other women out there, a lot of other activists out there, when these racist and sexist tropes come flying at her. And we've seen it already, right? What we've seen so far is Donald Trump and the Republicans have nothing accurate to say about her. They have no good way of tearing down her record. And so they have fallen back on the thing that they know. And that, unfortunately, is pushing these racist and sexist ideas and trying to make her other to people out there. What we know at Emily's List is that every woman that runs, including the great Wendy Gruhl, every woman that runs makes it better for the next woman to run, makes us see women more and more as leaders. We've never had a woman in this position before. We've only had 4 women on a major party ticket, and she's the 4th. And so the more we see this, the more we recognize that, hey, maybe some of those attacks on Hillary Clinton weren't just about Hillary Clinton, maybe some of those attacks, like when we talk about calling President Obama not American, maybe that wasn't just about him, maybe that was about his race, right? All of these things help make us more aware, and we believe voters are going to reject them.
And Christina, you raise an interesting point. It seems like the Trump administration was caught off guard. I don't know how. Every major newspaper talked about Senator Harris being, the top choice for Biden. He was campaigning with her even before he made the announcement. She has been a critical figure up, incoming rising star in the Democratic Party for years now. But it seems like they had no clue that it was going to be her, and yet they were, prepared, I guess, to launch these attacks on Susan Rice, who maybe they wanted to tie to Benghazi, or they had some other strategy with her. But could it be the case that the Trump administration, with all their money and knowledge, you would think, were really caught off guard with Kamala Harris?
I think it's baffling. I was the rapid response director for President Obama in his 2008 run, and I can tell you this is shocking how poorly they've responded and how all over the place they've been. I also think it's because it's harder to land, a stereotypical type of oh, she's too liberal. They've gone every which way, right? And because Senator Harris has been such a great advocate for people, because she's been such she has taken each issue as it comes. Her record reflects someone who's dealing with the situation that she's in and how to solve it. Because of all those things, she's not easily categorized unless you fall back on she is a Black and Indian American woman, and all of those things are something they're just going to attack using stereotypes and tropes.
Yeah, Wendy, you've been in a lot of elections, big elections. City of Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the country. You ran for mayor. You were first woman, second woman elected citywide when you won your city controller seat. You were also city council person for the city of Los Angeles. When you hear these attacks, do you have deja vu? Does it remind you of anything that happened to you when you were actually running for office in Los Angeles?
PTSD, I think so many women do when you follow these kinds of elections and you remember not only, campaigns are campaigns and you go against each other, but sometimes the hardest thing was the media attacks, which Christina has followed and pushed back a lot on the last election with women, where the media will use different kinds of descriptions, will give you a hard time about being ambitious, question whether you can be a good mom and a good politician, will question whether or not you can stand up and be strong, or as I was asked at one point, could I be mean enough as an elected official? And, running for mayor and being the first woman ever to be in the runoff, it was a position where people are still trying to figure out, do you run as a woman? Do you talk about it too much? And I got criticized on both sides. So I think we're seeing that in this instance, and them pitting women against each other. I think the other thing I will say is that it's always been more difficult And we've seen this in Emily's list and others about executive positions. People have a harder time electing women. But what we've seen, both in the response to COVID and to George Floyd, is the fact that women leaders, these mayors, whether it be in Atlanta or Chicago or San Francisco or Oakland or Phoenix, we've seen women leaders, women elected officials stand up, be able to be calm and direct and tough in a way to deal with these crises.
Yeah, I'll ask you this, Christina, because you do this for a living. I was, full disclosure, on board with the Wendy Gruhl for Mayor campaign. I was a surrogate for it at one point. I spoke out at events for, and I was so devastated when we didn't win that election. And I remember talking to a friend of mine and saying, "Oh my God, with women being the majority of voters in LA County, I just couldn't imagine that we didn't win." And my friend said to me that I was so naive to think that just because Wendy was a woman, that other women would vote for her. And I know, identity politics can get a little messy, but are we seeing that women are willing, now today, more willing to accept that other women have the executive power that Wendy talked about and can lead? Because I think in 2009, when Wendy was running, a lot of women had a problem with that.
Yeah, I think times are definitely changing, right? We saw the women in the presidential primary certainly got hit with the question of electability. Will voters actually accept a woman? And my attitude was always to point people back to a couple of things. One, in 2016, she didn't win the Electoral College, but we do know that more voters came out for Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. We know that voters will accept a woman. And in 2018, we saw women elected all over the place. Wendy mentioned some great mayors that have gotten elected in the last few years. We did triple the number of pro-choice Democratic women elected as governor. Now that's to 6, so it's not, we still have a lot of work to do. But I could not have been more proud of watching Gretchen Whitmer and Michelle Lujan Grisham and Gina Raimondo and Kate Brown deal with some of these issues. And I think, and Janet Mills, and I think that as you watch that, you are seeing society change. We have a different view of what leadership is now. When we think of a candidate, we don't just think of a man in a suit. We think of Stacey Abrams, we think of Nancy Pelosi, we think of Kamala Harris. And those are powerful visions for us. And I think, like I said, they will make it better for every woman who runs from here on out.
I know, Wendy, some of again, you said you have PTSD, and I can imagine why, particularly when you hear, again, you just said you were asked if you can be mean enough, and Trump is using mean and nasty as pejoratives against Kamala Harris, saying she's too nasty and she's too mean. And on the other side, you're saying you were actually asked if you could be mean enough. So how did you navigate, that tightrope?
You can't win in many instances, but I do think that the progress, as Christina has mentioned, that we have women leaders that are on the TV and people see them in the way in which they lead, in the way in which they manage crisis, that allows us to change the kind of conversation. And I know, Ariva, for you, what you have led in your, whether it be autism or in, making sure and Black Lives Matter, the issues that are so important to African-American women, you've tried to address some of these issues. And so whether you are elected or not, being the face, talking about these issues very clearly and definitively is an important part of it. I think as well, we made some progress with young women who thought we've reached, the pinnacle, that women can do anything. There are no barriers. It's easy to do. I was, if you were in college, there were more women in college than there might have been men, or in graduate school or law school. But after you get to a certain level, you realize, and age, that there still are those glass ceilings, and that still exists. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to try to break them. And I think the women you've had on today and every day that you are advocating are women that are going to help break that glass ceiling.
So something really important is going to happen. We can talk about breaking the glass ceiling. August 26th, we're going to celebrate the 100th year of the 19th Amendment and women having the right to vote. How significant do you think this anniversary, falling at this moment, Christina, is, given that we're going to have also this opportunity to vote to have perhaps the first woman vice president, in America's history?
It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge reminder of the work that went into that. It's also a reminder that that was the first time that some women in this country got the right to vote, but for many other women, including Black women, including Native American women, including Asian American women, they still faced trouble at the ballot. And that, frankly, is a reminder to all of us that we are still seeing voter suppression. And it too often impacts voters of, in communities of color. It too often impacts people whose voices we need to be hearing more, and who should be better represented in government. And so I think that a lot of us who work in politics will be using this opportunity to call out both of those things. We can celebrate that history and also note that we still have work to do.
Yeah. And Wendy, I'll end by asking you this. I know that at some point you became supportive of Kamala Harris in her presidential campaign. What we continue to hear, particularly from some younger voters, is this fixation on her, record as a prosecutor when she was in Oakland, San Francisco, and her record here when she was Attorney General. What would you say to those voters who, still think that somehow her record as a prosecutor disqualifies her for this election, and also, really undermines her in terms of being a progressive that they can count on for things like criminal justice reform?
Well, Kamala for us in this state really has been an extraordinary leader, an elected official. And I think as a prosecutor, what she was trying to do was be a prosecutor with the heart, as well as follow the law. And for me, what I have appreciated about Kamala, and why I think she is a great vice presidential candidate and will be a great vice president, is that she has sat with people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. She has not only in some instances sat with those that are victims, and sat with others that are challenged in the criminal justice system. She's got the experience, I believe, at every single level to be a vice president that understands the challenges not only that we have in our criminal justice system, but also the issues that women face, equal pay, the importance of having someone who is going to be our advocate. And so I say to those who would question her record, I'm proud of her record. And I think that as we look at a Biden-Harris ticket against Trump-Pence, there's no question about the fact that they are going to lead us into this next several years, someone who's going to address the issues that matter most to us and progressives.
Well, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much, Wendy Gruhl. Thank you, Christina Reynolds. The great work you both are doing in terms of addressing issues of sexism. We know that this is a huge issue, not just for Kamala Harris as she moves into the most important role of her life, but also for all women who are thinking of running for office and those who are in office. So again, thank you for your work in helping to break down some of these barriers.
Thank you, Ariva, for all that you do. Appreciate it.
My next guest, you heard Christina talk about the 19th Amendment and how even though it was the amendment that gave women the right to vote, it didn't give all women the right to vote. And my next guest is an expert on sexism and racism in women in elected office. She's an acclaimed historian and professor of history at Johns Hopkins University. She's Dr. Martha Jones, and she's the author of multiple books, including her latest book, Vanguard: How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. I wanted to sit down with Dr. Jones to talk about this issue of not all women getting the vote and how women of color are treated, especially in this election. So good morning, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You've written extensively about these issues of sexism and really with an emphasis on the role of racism in electoral politics. What do you make of the attacks that we're seeing from the White House and from others, whether they're from the right-wing media, from Twitter trolls, to these people who are attacking Kamala Harris in the most vicious way around her race? What do you make of some of these attacks?
These attacks, you've mentioned, for example, the attack on Kamala Harris's ambition. This, in my view, is one of the oldest critiques one can invoke against a Black woman in public life. We could go all the way back to the beginning of the 19th century and discover cartoons and caricatures that portray Black women in public life as aspiring too much, right? And here, I think this is intended to suggest to us that somehow Senator Harris is out of place, that she's overturning some kind of established order. Well, maybe she is, and it's about time, but it comes in the form of this sort of critique. I heard your conversation with Representative Bass, and I think there's also an old stereotype about African-American women, the mammy stereotype, as somehow too complicit, complacent, right? Not aggressive enough. And so we're hearing really threadbare, old, worn out critiques being leveled at women whose public careers clearly are not only on the ascent, but are deeply steeped in their records, their merits. And it doesn't seem to be getting the kind of traction that I imagine those who are leveling the critiques might have hoped.
Well, you say that, Dr. Jones, and I don't know if I'm convinced of that yet. When you look at the election in 2016, again, you look at the number of white women in particular that voted for Donald Trump, you have to imagine that, maybe they believed it was in their best economic interest, but you also have to imagine that some of those sexist tropes that we hear so much about played some role in that. The trope that women somehow aren't competent or aren't capable. And I wonder if we'll see some of that seeping in to this election as well, because now we have the double whammy, not just a woman, but also a woman of color. And we know that can be, that combination can be, a killer for a lot of women as they attempt to ascend to roles of power in their organizations, and in this case, in the political sphere. So help us understand what we should expect from women who in 2016 had issues with voting for Hillary Clinton. What's going to be different in this election?
Well, I think one of the things that is different and has been different on the ground is that when it came for time for Vice President Biden to vet candidates, there wasn't one Black woman, or two, or three, or four. There were 5 and 6. And I do think that experience for all of us as a nation, getting to know the people in that field, getting to appreciate how different they were from one another, right? That these weren't 6 cookie cutter Black women. These were actual living, breathing, experienced women with personalities, with positions, and all of that. And so I'm with you in the sense that kinds of transformation is slow, and it's painful to those of us who see the extraordinary capacity of these women to lead us in a very, very difficult chapter, right? Next chapter of this nation's history. So I sympathize with that. And yet for me, when I realized that we were going to have 6 Black women in a field of a dozen or more women, all of whom, right, any of whom could have been a forceful candidate for the vice presidency, I see us as a nation turning. It is not everything, and it is not at the pace. I'm somebody who writes about 200 years of African-American women's history. And so I am the first one to tell you that transformation and the battle against racism and sexism and their intersection in the political lives of Black women has been a 200+ year project in this country. And yet I'm not someone who thinks that we haven't moved anywhere, even in a short 4 years. And on balance, I read Kamala Harris's nomination as a reflection of that movement, not because we've arrived, but because we're continuing to move.
But does this surprise you at all, Dr. Jones, when you see headlines about what women wear, headlines about women needing to smile more, they're not smiling enough, and headlines about, again, women being too ambitious. And we've seen these headlines. This is a tweet that was tweeted out after Hillary Clinton gave her speech in 2016. It says, "Smile, you just had a big night." And on the surface, that could seem like a very innocuous tweet, but we know, again, that's a part of those tropes that are played out against women that we don't see used against men. So I understand that you said this is, a dynamic process. You're looking at women and Black women in particular over 200 years. But does it surprise you that in this era, this 2016 to 2020 time period, that we're still talking about women needing to smile, or maybe they smile too much, or what's their wardrobe, critiquing their wardrobe, critiquing their hair. We know we saw some of those critiques about Stacey Abrams in terms of how she wears her hair and those natural twists. Are those kinds of attacks, are they surprising at all to you in this era?
Well, they can't be surprising to any of us who have lived under this White House regime for the last years, a regime that has not only opened the door to those kind of critiques, has traded in, and it to some degree succeeded by way of those critiques. One of the things we could say, I think, about this year, right, it is a test of those kinds of ideas, of that style of politics. And we will have to be the arbiters of that in November when we get to the ballot box. There's nothing short of that. That is that is the place where we push back or we concede. And one question is what have American women learned about the persistence and the perniciousness of these sorts of stereotypes? Because I would say it's important to remember, Ariva, that it is not only a stereotype that visits women in politics. I'm a woman in academia, you in law, in journalism. We know that any American woman in public life, in professional life, has had somebody say to her, why don't you just smile? And we know what that means. And so the question, I think, in 2020 is, will we take that with us into the voting booth, right? And vote in a way that continues to, if you will, put the nail in the coffin of that kind of sexism. I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I do want to encourage us to think of this moment as an opportunity, right? To speak back to those kinds of stereotypes that we're hearing wielded at Senator Harris and others, the kinds of pernicious microaggressions, right, that so many American women face. This is old, it is tired, it is something that's been traded in, and I think we're facing a test this November about whether or not we're prepared to help put it to bed.
And Dr. Jones, I just want to ask you about men, because I've been stunned. I mentioned earlier in the show, Jared Kushner, he was being interviewed by a CNN anchor, and she asked him if he would apologize on behalf of Donald Trump for the birther attack that's being made against Senator Harris. He refused to do so. The anchor asked Jared Kushner if he would just even acknowledge that she was born in Oakland, California, and she is indeed a U.S. citizen, absolutely qualified to run for a vice president, to run for any office. And he refused to do that as well. And I know that we can't break down these structural barriers of sexism and racism without having the input and having some, few good men, some men, and see some profiles in courage where men step up and say enough is enough, and they fight back against these attacks. Why aren't we seeing more men, particularly those men that serve with Kamala Harris in the Senate? Why aren't we seeing more men stand up and say this is ridiculous? It's sexist, it's racist. She's absolutely qualified. You can disagree about her policies. You can critique her record. All of that's fair game for a politician. But the notion that she's somehow too ambitious or any of these other attacks against her are, just out and out wrong. And that Donald Trump should quit. He should just stop. Where are the men, Dr. Jones?
The resurgence, if you will, of the the birther charge, right? That Kamala Harris isn't eligible to hold the office of president was something that we visited with Barack Obama. It is something that has persisted at a low but discernible level in our political discourse, oftentimes being leveled at immigrant Americans more generally. And I'll say, as someone who was very outspoken in that debate earlier, I watched my male colleagues in law and in politics and in journalism step up and put to bed the birther argument. There was a major news outlet, Newsweek, that had been at the fore of leveling the birther charge at Senator Harris. Newsweek apologized. Newsweek apologized this week. And we never got that sort of apology in President Obama's time in office. But in short charge, with very serious people coming to the table, coming up to the plate and speaking directly to that charge, Newsweek backed down and apologized. And so I do see that some of these very tired, threadbare, and well disputed sorts of charges against Senator Harris, folks are equipped for that and are going to come back hard. And the birther example is a good one. As I understand it, even the White House has backtracked and conceded that she is eligible to hold the office of president. That all happened in a short week, as contrasted with 8 years of President Obama and the persistence of that crude and rude intervention. Again, not everything, but I think that we're in a different place in 2020.
So you're giving the guys a C grade, you're giving them a B grade. What grade are you giving them, Dr. Jones?
I'm giving them a rising B, and say that it is time, right? It is time to earn the A+, right? Because we know what's coming. We see it for what it is. We don't need to do research. We don't need to dig into our archives. We need to use our voices. We need to use our pens. And I'm seeing signs of good allies who are prepared to do that. And we've got a long way to go before we get to November 3rd.
All right, fellas, you heard it from Dr. Jones. You have a rising B, but the standard here is an A+, and you got work to do.
Absolutely.
We want to hear more voices lifted up on these issues. We want to hear more voices telling Donald Trump to cut it out, because this is nonsense. And we've got to get to the business of taking care of the millions of Americans in this country that are hurting and who care about their health care and their economic status, and not about whether vice president is ambitious, because the answer is yes, and it's hell yes, she is ambitious. And that's what every person that's ever been in that office has been. They've been ambitious. Again, thank you, Dr. Jones. Good luck with your book, Vanguard. I can't wait to dive into it myself. And thank you again for lifting your voice on these important issues.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks to all of my guests today. I always love when we get to talk about these issues and we have powerful women on, because I don't know what you think, but I think women really do run the world. But it's always fun to sit down and get different opinions about what's going on. And we can't talk enough about this whole sexism and racism issue that is really oversized in this election. Continue to follow me at Ariva Martin, because this is a conversation I'm going to stay on. It's personal for me. You heard Dr. Jones say this is not just about women in politics. If you are a woman, if you're a woman of color in particular, and you're in any industry, you have probably been told you are too ambitious, or maybe that you don't smile enough. So these are issues that really impact all women. So we're going to just keep having these conversations. Just a couple of words to live by before we get out. 100 years after women fought for the right to vote, we are still talking about sexism and racism, statements being hurled at women like Kamala Harris and so many women who run for office. To me, this is really mind-boggling, particularly when 50% of all voters, more than 50% of the eligible voters in this upcoming election, guess what? They are women. And for the first time in history, more than 1/3 are minority. So women should be past having to prove likability and electability. We shouldn't be talking about what women wear and how often she smiles and whether she is likable. These sexist tropes need to be put to bed. They need to be put to rest once and for all. Women have proven that they are not only qualified, but they've proven that they are more than qualified to lead. Senator Harris has what would be considered the perfect resume if she were a man. She ran the country's largest attorney general's office other than the U.S. Attorney's Office. She became the only second woman, Black woman, to be elected to the U.S. Senate. Uh, that was after Carol Moseley Braun was elected in Illinois. She was the first African American woman to become the Attorney General for the state of California, a state with 40 million people. She's a lawyer and she's been a public servant throughout her entire career. If her name were Kevin Harris and not Kamala Harris, we wouldn't even be having conversations about her level of ambition. And we wouldn't be talking about whether she's fit to lead. The question wouldn't be asked, and the answer would be unequivocally yes. So, let's put it to bed. We are hopeful that Senator Harris and Joe Biden will be successful in this upcoming election, but we're more hopeful that her selection to that VP ticket will help us in this country move forward, break down barriers that have been stubborn and that have been hard to break down. And as I asked Dr. Jones, we can't do it alone as ladies. We need men. We need men to be our allies in this fight to break down these barriers. So I'm asking, are there a few good men out there ready to stop the nonsense and to stop talking about women like we're incompetent? You know that we are. We're already your mothers, we're your sisters, we're your bosses. And we've been leading organizations and leading our families in this nation for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's our time and we need you standing next to us. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Wear your mask and remember, we're all in this together. Big shout out to my production team and to you for joining me for this critical show today.